I am all in favor of your idea that we should go back to our old plan of having a more or less set subject, an agendum for our letters. When we were last separated, the correspondence languished for lack of it. How much better we did in our undergraduate days with our interminable letters on the Republic and classical meters, and what was then the new psychology. Nothing makes an absent friend so present as a disagreement. Prayer, which you suggest, is a subject that is a good deal in my mind. I mean private prayer. If you are thinking of corporate prayer, I won't play. There is no subject in the world, always excepting sport, on which I have less to say than liturgiology, and the almost nothing which I have to say may as well be disposed of in this letter. I think our business as laymen is to take what we are given and make the best of it. And I think we should find this a great deal easier if what we were given was always and everywhere the same. To judge from their practice, very few Anglican clergymen take this view. It looks as if they believe people can be lured to go to church by incessant brightenings, lightenings, lengthenings, abridgments, simplifications, and complications of the service. And it is probably true that a new keen vicar will usually be able to form within his parish a minority who are in favor of his innovations. The majority, I believe, never are. Those who remain, many give up church-going altogether, merely endure. Is this simply because the majority are hidebound? I think not. They have a good reason for their conservatism. Novelty, simply as such, can have only an entertainment value, and they don't go to church to be entertained. They go to use the service, or, if you prefer, to enact it. Every service is a structure of acts and words through which we receive a sacrament, or repent, or supplicate, or adore. And it enables us to do these things best. If you like, it works best when, through long familiarity, we don't have to think about it. As long as you notice and have to count the steps, you are not yet dancing, but only learning to dance. A good shoe is a shoe you don't notice. Good reading becomes possible when you need not consciously think about eyes, or light, or print, or spelling. The perfect church service would be one we were almost unaware of. Our attention would have been on God. But every novelty prevents this. It fixes our attention on the service itself, and thinking about worship is a different thing from worshiping. The important question about the Grail was, for what does it serve? 'Tis mad idolatry that makes the service greater than the God. A still worse thing may happen. Novelty may fix our attention, not even on the service, but on the celebrant. You know what I mean. Try as one may to exclude it, the question, what on earth is he up to now, will intrude. It lays one's devotion waste. There is really some excuse for the man who said, I wish they'd remember that the charge to Peter was feed my sheep, not try experiments on my rats, or even teach my performing dogs new tricks. Thus my whole liturgiological position really boils down to an entreaty for permanence and uniformity. I can make do with almost any kind of service whatever, if only it will stay put. But if each form is snatched away just when I am beginning to feel at home in it, then I can never make any progress in the art of worship. You give me no chance to acquire the trained habit, habito dell'arte. It may well be that some variations, which seem to me merely matters of taste, really involve grave doctrinal differences, but surely not all. For if grave doctrinal differences are really as numerous as variations in practice, then we shall have to conclude that no such thing as the Church of England exists. And anyway, the liturgical fidget is not a purely Anglican phenomenon. I have heard Roman Catholics complain of it too. And that brings me back to my starting point. The business of us laymen is simply to endure and make the best of it. Any tendency to a passionate preference for one type of service must be regarded simply as a temptation. Partisan churchmanships are my bête noire. And if we avoid them, may we not possibly perform a very useful function? The shepherds go off, everyone to his own way, and vanish over diverse points of the horizon. If the sheep huddle patiently together and go on bleating, might they finally recall the shepherds? Haven't English victories sometimes been won by the rank and file in spite of the generals? As to the words of the service, liturgy in the narrower sense, the question is rather different. If you have a vernacular liturgy, you must have a changing liturgy. Otherwise, it will finally be vernacular only in name. The ideal of timeless English is sheer nonsense. No living language can be timeless. You might as well ask for a motionless river. I think it would have been best, if it were possible, that necessary change should have occurred gradually, and, to most people, imperceptibly, here a little and there a little, one obsolete word replaced in a century, like the gradual change of spelling in successive editions of Shakespeare. As things are, we must reconcile ourselves, if we can also reconcile government, to a new book. If we were, I thank my stars I'm not, in a position to give its authors advice, would you have any advice to give them? Mine could hardly go beyond unhelpful cautions. Take care. It is so easy to break eggs without making omelettes. Already our liturgy is one of the very few remaining elements of unity in our hideously divided church. The good to be done by revision needs to be very great and very certain before we throw that away. Can you imagine any new book which will not be a source of new schism? Most of those who press for revision seem to wish that it should serve two purposes, that of modernizing the language in the interests of intelligibility and that of doctrinal improvement. Of the two operations, each painful and each dangerous to be carried out at the same time, will the patent survive? What are the agreed doctrines which are to be embodied in the new book, and how long will agreement on them continue? I ask with trepidation, because I read a man the other day who seemed to wish that everything in the old book which was inconsistent with orthodox Freudianism should be deleted. For whom are we to cater in revising the language? A country parson I know asked his sexton what he understood by indifferently in the phrase truly and indifferently administer justice. The man replied, "It means making no difference between one chap and another." "And what would it mean if it said impartially?" asked the parson. "Don't know. Never heard of it," said the sexton. "Here, you see, we have a change intended to make things easier. But it does so neither for the educated, who understand indifferently already, nor for the wholly uneducated, who don't understand impartially. It helps only some middle area of the congregation, which may not even be a majority. Let us hope the revisers will prepare for their work by a prolonged empirical study of popular speech as it actually is, not as we, a priori, assume it to be. How many scholars know what I discovered by accident? that when uneducated people say impersonal, they sometimes mean incorporeal. What of expressions which are archaic, but not unintelligible? Be ye lift up. I find that people react to archaism most diversely. It antagonizes some, makes what is said unreal. To others, not necessarily more learned, it is highly numinous and a real aid to devotion. We can't please both. I know there must be change. But is this the right moment? Two signs of the right moment occur to me. One would be a unity among us which enabled the Church, not some momentarily triumphant party, to speak through the new work with a united voice. The other would be the manifest presence somewhere in the Church of the specifically literary talent needed for composing a good prayer. Prose needs to be not only very good, but very good in a very special way. If it is to stand up to reiterated reading aloud. Cranmer may have his defects as a theologian, as a stylist. He can play all the moderns and many of his predecessors off the field. I don't see either sign at the moment. Yet, we all want to be tinkering. Even I would gladly see, let your light so shine before men, removed from the offertory. It sounds, in that context, so like an exhortation to do our alms, that they may be seen by men. I'd meant to follow up what you say about Rose Macaulay's letters, but that must wait till next week. Why, you say that my view of church services is man-centered and too concerned with mere edification. How does this follow from anything I said? Actually, my ideas about the sacrament would probably be called magical by a good many modern theologians. Surely the more fully one believes that a strictly supernatural event takes place, the less one can attach any great importance to the dress, gestures, and position of the priest. I agree with you that he is there not only to edify the people, but to glorify God. But how can a man glorify God by placing obstacles in the way of the people? Especially if the slightest element of clerical one-upmanship, I owe the phrase to a cleric, underlies some of his eccentricities. How right is that passage in the Imitation where the celebrant is told, consult not your own devotion, but the edification of your flock. I've forgotten how the Latin runs. Now, about the Rose Macaulay letters. Like you, I was staggered by this continual search for more and more prayers. If she were merely collecting them as objet d'art, I could understand it. She was a born collector. But I get the impression that she collected them in order to use them, that her whole prayer life depended on what we may call ready-made prayers, prayers written by other people. But though, like you, staggered, I was not, like you, repelled. One reason is that I had, and you hadn't, the luck to meet her. Make no mistake, she was the right sort, one of the most fully civilized people I ever knew. The other reason, as I have so often told you, is that you are a bigot. Broaden your mind, Malcolm, broaden your mind. It takes all sorts to make a world, or a church. This may be even truer of a church. If grace perfects nature, it must expand all our natures into the full richness of the diversity which God intended when he made them, and heaven will display far more variety than hell. One fold doesn't mean one pool. Cultivated roses and daffodils are no more alike than wild roses and daffodils. What pleased me most about a Greek Orthodox Mass I once attended was that there seemed to be no prescribed behavior for the congregation. Some stood, some knelt, some sat, some walked. One crawled about the floor like a caterpillar. And the beauty of it was that nobody took the slightest notice of what anyone else was doing. I wish we Anglicans would follow their example. One meets people who are perturbed because someone in the next pew does or does not cross himself. They oughtn't even to have seen, let alone censured. Who art thou that judgest another's servant? I don't doubt, then, that Rose Macaulay's method was the right one for her. It wouldn't be for me any more than for you. All the same, I am not quite such a purist in this matter as I used to be. For many years after my conversion, I never used any ready-made forms except the Lord's Prayer. In fact, I tried to pray without words at all, not to verbalize the mental acts. Even in praying for others, I believe I tended to avoid their names and substituted mental images of them. I still think the prayer without words is the best, if one can really achieve it. But I now see that in trying to make it my daily bread, I was counting on a greater mental and spiritual strength than I really have. To pray successfully without words, one needs to be at the top of one's form. Otherwise, the mental acts become merely imaginative or emotional acts, and a fabricated emotion is a miserable affair. When the golden moments come, when God enables one really to pray without words, who but a fool would reject the gift? But he does not give it, anyway, not to me, day in, day out. My mistake was what Pascal, if I remember rightly, calls error of Stoicism, thinking we can do always what we can do sometimes. And this, you see, makes the choice between ready-made prayers and one's own words rather less important for me than it apparently is for you. For me, words are, in any case, secondary. They are only an anchor, or, shall I say, they are the movements of a conductor's baton, not the music. They serve to canalize the worship or penitence or petition which might without them, such are our minds, spread into wide and shallow puddles. It does not matter very much who first put them together. If they are our own words, they will soon, by unavoidable repetition, harden into a formula. If they are someone else's, we shall continually pour into them our own meaning. At present, for one's practice changes, and I think ought to change, I find it best to make my own words the staple, but introduce a modicum of the ready-made. Writing to you, I need not stress the importance of the homemade staple. As Solomon said at the dedication of the temple, each man who prays knows the plague of his own heart, also the comforts of his own heart. No other creature is identical with me, no other situation identical with mine. Indeed, I myself and my situation are in continual change. A ready-made form can't serve for my intercourse with God any more than it could serve for my intercourse with you. This is obvious. Perhaps I shan't find it so easy to persuade you that the ready-made modicum has also its use. For me, I mean, I'm not suggesting rules for anyone else in the whole world. First, it keeps me in touch with sound doctrine. Left to oneself, one could easily slide away from the faith once given into a phantom called my religion. Secondly, it reminds me what things I ought to ask, perhaps especially when I am praying for other people. The crisis of the present moment, like the nearest telegraph post, will always loom largest. Isn't there a danger that our great permanent objective necessities, often more important, may get crowded out? By the way, that's another thing to be avoided in a revised prayer book. Contemporary problems may claim an undue share, and the more up-to-date the book is, the sooner it will be dated. Finally, they provide an element of the ceremonial. On your view, that is just what we don't want. On mine, it is part of what we want. I see what you mean when you say that using ready-made prayers would be like making love to your own wife out of Petrarch or Donne. Incidentally, might you not quote them to such a literary wife as Betty? The parallel won't do. I fully agree that the relationship between God and a man is more private and intimate than any possible relation between two fellow creatures. Yes, but at the same time there is, in another way, a greater distance between the participants. We are approaching, well, I won't say the wholly other, for I suspect that is meaningless, but the unimaginably and insupportably other. We ought to be, sometimes I hope one is, simultaneously aware of closest proximity and infinite distance. You make things far too snug and confiding. Your erotic analogy needs to be supplemented by, I fell at his feet as one dead. I think the low church milieu that I grew up in did tend to be too cozily at ease in Sion. My grandfather, I'm told, used to say that he looked forward to having some very interesting conversations with St. Paul when he got to heaven. Two clerical gentlemen talking at ease in a club. It never seemed to cross his mind that an encounter with St. Paul might be rather an overwhelming experience, even for an evangelical clergyman of good family. But when Dante saw the great apostles in heaven, they affected him like mountains. There's lots to be said against devotions to saints, but at least they keep on reminding us that we are very small people compared with them. How much smaller before their master? A few formal, ready-made prayers serve me as a corrective of, well, let's call it cheek. They keep one side of the paradox alive. Of course, it is only one side. It would be better not to be reverent at all than to have a reverence which denied the proximity. Christians, then, believe that an evil power has made himself for the present the prince of this world. And of course that raises problems. Is this state of affairs in accordance with God's will or not? If it is, he is a strange God, you will say. And if it is not, how can anything happen contrary to the will of a being with absolute power? But anyone who's been in authority knows how a thing can be in accordance with your will in one way and not in another. It may be quite sensible for a mother to say to the children, not going to go and make you tidy the schoolroom every night. You've got to learn to keep it tidy on your own. Then she goes up one night and lines the teddy bear and the ink and the French grammar all lying in the grate. That is against her will. She would prefer the children to be tidy. But on the other hand, it is her will which has left the children free to be untidy. The same thing arises in any regiment, or trade union, or school. You make a thing voluntary, and then half the people do not do it. That is not what you willed, but your will has made it possible. It is probably the same in the universe. God created things which had free will. That means creatures which can go either wrong or right. Some people think they can imagine a creature which was free, but had no possibility of going wrong. I cannot. If a thing is free to be good, it is also free to be bad. And free will is what has made evil possible. Why then did God give them free will? Because free will, though it makes evil possible, is also the only thing that makes possible any love or goodness or joy worth having. A world of automata, of creatures that worked like machines, would hardly be worth creating. The happiness which God designs for his higher creatures is the happiness of being freely, voluntarily united to him and to each other in an ecstasy of love and delight, compared with which the most rapturous love between a man and a woman on this earth is mere milk and water. And for that, they must be free. Of course, God knew what would happen if they used their freedom the wrong way. Apparently, he thought it worth the risk. Perhaps we feel inclined to disagree with him. But there is a difficulty about disagreeing with God. He is the source from which all your reasoning power comes. You could not be right, and he wrong any more than a stream can rise higher than its own source. When you are arguing against him, you are arguing against the very power that makes you able to argue at all. It is like cutting off the branch you are sitting on. If God thinks this state of war in the universe a price worth paying for free will, that is, for making a live world in which creatures can do real good or harm, and something of real importance can happen, instead of a toy world which only moves when he pulls the strings, then we may take it is worth paying. When we have understood about free will, we shall see how silly it is to ask, as somebody once asked me, why did God make a creature of such rotten stuff that it went wrong? The better stuff a creature is made of, the cleverer and stronger and freer it is, then the better it will be if it goes right. But also the worse it will be if it goes wrong. A cow cannot be very good or very bad. A dog can be both better and worse. A child, better and worse still. An ordinary man, still more so. A man of genius, still more so. A superhuman spirit hest, or worst of all. How did the dark power go wrong? Here, no doubt, we ask a question to which human beings cannot give an answer with any certainty. A reasonable and traditional guess, based on our own experiences of going wrong, can, however, be offered. The moment you have a self at all, there is a possibility of putting yourself first, wanting to be the center, wanting to be God, in fact. That was the sin of Satan, and that was the sin he taught the human race. Some people think the fail of man had something to do with sex, but that is a mistake. The story in the book of Genesis rather suggests that some corruption in our sexual nature followed the fail and was its result, not its cause. What Satan put into the heads of our remote ancestors was the idea that they could be like gods, could set up on their own as if they had created themselves, be their own masters, invent some sort of happiness for themselves outside God, apart from God. And out of that hopeless attempt has come nearly all that we call human history: money, poverty, ambition, war, prostitution, classes, empires, slavery, the long, terrible story of man trying to find something other than God which will make him happy. The reason why it can never succeed is this: God made us, invented us as a man invents an engine. A car is made to run on gasoline, and it would not run properly on anything else. Now God designed the human machine to run on himself. He himself is the fuel our spirits were designed to burn, or the food our spirits were designed to feed on. There is no other. That is why it is just no good asking God to make us happy in our own way without bothering about religion. God cannot give us a happiness and peace apart from himself, because it is not there. There is no such thing. That is the key to history. terrific energy is expended, civilizations are built up, excellent institutions devised, but each time something goes wrong. Some fatal flaw always brings the selfish and cruel people to the top, and it all slides back into misery and ruin. In fact, the machine conks. It seems to start up all right and runs at Jew yards, and then it breaks down. They're trying to run it on the wrong juice. That is what Satan has done to us humans. And what did God do? First of all, he left us conscience, the sense of right and wrong. And all through history, there have been people trying, some of them very hard, to obey it. None of them ever quite succeeded. Secondly, he sent the human race what I call good dreams. I mean those queer stories scattered all through the heathen religions about a God who dies and comes to life again, and by his death has somehow given new life to men. Thirdly, he selected one particular people and spent several centuries hammering into their heads the sort of God he was, that there was only one of him and that he cared about right conduct. Those people were the Jews, and the Old Testament gives an account of the hammering process. Then comes the real shock. Among these Jews, there suddenly turns up a man who goes about talking as if he was God. He claims to forgive sins. He says he has always existed. He says he is coming to judge the world at the end of time. Now let us get this clear. Among pantheists, like the Indians, anyone might say that he was a part of God, or one with God. There would be nothing very odd about it. But this man, since he was a Jew, could not mean that kind of God. God, in their language, meant the being outside the world who had made it and was infinitely different from anything else. And when you have grasped that, you will see that what this man said was quite simply the most shocking thing that has ever been uttered by human lips. One part of the claim tends to slip past us unnoticed, because we have heard it so often that we no longer see what it amounts to. I mean the claim to forgive sins, any sins. Now, unless the speaker is God, this is really so preposterous as to be comic. We can all understand how a man forgives offenses against himself. You tread on my toe, and I forgive you. You steal my money, and I forgive you. But what should we make of a man himself unrobbed and untrodden on, who announced that he forgave you for treading on other men's toes and stealing other men's money? Asinine fatuity is the kindest description we should give of his conduct. Yet this is what Jesus did. He told people that their sins were forgiven, and never waited to consult all the other people whom their sins had undoubtedly injured. He unhesitatingly behaved as if he was the party chiefly concerned, the person chiefly offended in all offenses. This makes sense only if he really was the God whose laws are broken and whose love is wounded in every sin. In the mouth of any speaker who is not God, these words would imply what I can only regard as a silliness and conceit unrivaled by any other character in history. Yet, and this is a strong, significant thing even, his enemies, when they read the Gospels, do not usually get the impression of silliness and conceit. Still less do unprejudiced readers. Christ says that he is humble and meek, and we believe him, not noticing that if he were merely a man, humility and meekness are the very last characteristics we could attribute to some of his sayings. I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on a level with the man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to.